Hello everyone, and welcome to Game 11 of the 1972 World Chess Championship match between Boris Spassky and Robert James Fischer. Now, Fischer is in the lead, 6.5 to 3.5, and things are not looking all that great for the world champion Boris Spassky. His second, Nicolas Krogius, was invited to 2 or 3 days to visit Moscow to report on the world champion's poor showing in Reykjavik, but Spassky strictly refused that Krogius doesn't go, and Krogius said that's definitely the best decision. There's no point in crying over spilt milk. Our world champion is down 3 points, and we just have to find a way how to resurrect him. So in the previous game, Fischer defeated Spassky in his favorite line of the Breyer line of the Ruy Lopez, and that was a very impressive feat. So here Boris doesn't really have a choice. He has to strike where Fischer is strongest. He has to once again, like in Game 7, try to get some sort of an edge in the Najdorf variation of the Sicilian. So without further ado, Spassky has the white pieces, and the world champion in Game 11 opens with e4. So Fischer, of course, when he saw this, he knows that Spassky definitely prepared something, but as Fischer is considered to be the greatest expert on the Najdorf, he plays c5. Knight to f3, we have d6, d4, c captures on d4, knight captures on d4, and knight to f6. We have knight to c3, and now a6. The Najdorf variation is on the board. Bishop to g5, everything the same like in Game 7. We have e6 and now f4. And although Spassky is down 3 points in the match, Nikolai says that he has been known to come back from worse situations, so don't write off Boris just yet. And here we have queen to b6, the poisoned pawn variation. Fischer is inviting Spassky to offer his pawn very nicely, like he did in Game 7, and so Spassky does. We have queen to d2. Fischer accepts the pawn, queen captures on b2, and now comes knight to b3. The idea is the same. The threat is if Fischer made a silly move like bishop to e7, let's say, then a3 is coming, and now rook to a2 would be a threat to win the queen. Of course, you don't win the queen, you will win a piece after something like knight to c6, rook a2, and now knight captures on e4. But still, rook captures, knight captures here, and then after king captures, you will have won a piece, and have a much better game. So of course, Fischer doesn't want to allow this. Like in Game 7, Fischer plays queen to a3. And now comes bishop captures on f6. In Game 7, Spassky played bishop to d3, but in this game he will leave the d file open for some possible attacks. So here, first he plays bishop captures on f6, he messes up Fischer's pawn structure on the king side. G captures on f6, and now comes the bishop to e2. Again, a new move. Spassky is preparing bishop to h5 to hone in on this f7 pawn. So Fischer has to waste a move here. To prevent this, he plays h5, and here comes castles by Spassky. And here Fischer plays knight to c6. This is not a new position, this was all played before. Here the standard idea is something like knight to d7 followed by knight to c5. You exchange a knight for this knight on b3, and then your queen can come back into the game. Fischer goes for a different idea. Instead of knight c6, he goes knight to d7. Instead of knight to d7, he goes knight to c6 with some similar ideas. Perhaps this knight can come to a5 and exchange it for the knight on b3 and get the queen back into play this way. King to h1, and this seems like a very prophylactic move, and often in positions like these, when you have this diagonal open, when the queen and the dark square bishop might use this diagonal for some future combinations, it's often a very good move. But here both Gligoric and Krogius consider this to be somewhat a waste of time. A move that Spassky had prepared, they think he should have played it immediately without king to h1. But, he's the world champion. Who are you to question his king to h1 move? Bishop to d7 by Fischer. Now, this knight to c6 followed by bishop to d7 was very much criticized by the commentators. They thought that he should have immediately gone for this exchange with knight to a5, but with this, he allows Spassky to go for his very nice move. For this move, Spassky spent over 30 minutes over the board. So later, after the game, everyone thought that it was a prepared variation that, some group of strong grandmasters was called in Moscow to find some ingredient to beat Fischer's poison pawn variation, and that they came to this move. But as Spassky did spend over 30 minutes on this move, and after the game Spassky said that he found it over the board. So, I mean, who are we to not trust Boris Spassky? Knight to b1 comes with an attack on the queen, and here it's interesting that Fischer spent more time than Spassky on his next move trying to figure out all of the variations, because now the queen doesn't really have all that many squares. Queen to a4 is a possibility, but Fischer decides against it. After queen to a4, a3 is definitely coming, threatening knight to c3 to win the queen, but now after knight to e7, the queen does have a retreat square on c6. For example, after knight to c3, queen can come to c6, but Fischer decides against this. The knight can keep on attacking the queen, and it can get very dangerous for black. So instead, Fischer goes queen to b4, immediately offers a trade of queens, but Spassky simply moves the queen. Queen to e3, and now is again threatening a3 and the knight to c3 to win the queen. For example, if something like bishop to e7 were played, then a3, queen to a4, and now knight to c3 will win the queen. So after queen to e3, there were a lot of ideas here. Well, it's not all that easy to find how to wiggle your queen out. Chief arbiter Lothar Schmidt suggested that f5 should be played. You know, a nice pawn sacrifice, so you can make some advances in the center to make some room for your queen. Fischer's idea is similar, only he advances with the d pawn, but this doesn't really work. The best idea here was simply knight back to e7. You have to free the c6 square for your queen. After the queen is attacked, then you can go queen to a4 followed by queen to c6, and it's a very passive position for black, but it does seem to be like the way to go. Fischer goes d5. He tries to sacrifice the pawn to gain some room for the queen, but here comes e captures on d5. Fischer goes knight to e7, now making some room for the queen, and now comes c4. This seems to be the move that Fischer missed during his long calculation, because now it's not all that clear what to play here for black. If you play e captures on d5, you get knight to c3, now attacking the d5 pawn. And after d captures on c4, now comes knight to d5, attacking the queen on b4, attacking with a double attack on the knight on e7, also threatening knight captures on f6. And after queen to d6 defending, now comes bishop captures on c4. b5 and now even knight to c5, a crazy position, but black is very limited with what he can do. If pawn captures, then comes the knight captures on d7. You cannot capture. If you capture with the queen, then you lose the queen. Knight f7 with a nice fork, and if you capture with the king, then comes knight to b6 with a check and forking the rook. After the king moves, knight captures on a8. Spassky would be up the exchange and also with a winning position. So after c4, Fischer tries a different idea. He tries knight to f5 with an attack on Spassky's queen, and simply queen to d3. And here it's, again, if you try something like e captures on d5, again you get knight to c3, d captures, and now queen to e4 with check. Queen to e7, and now you get queen captures on b7, threatening to capture the rook here after the rook moves. Rook f to c1, threatening discoveries. White is much better here. So after queen to d3, Fischer tries an active plan, but, you know, the position is much too passive for an active plan. Fischer tries h4. Fischer is hoping for some ideas like bishop to c5, either a bishop or a queen to c5. For example, if this knight were to capture the bishop to control the g1 square, and then knight to g3 check would be deadly, because after pawn captures would be checkmate. So here Spassky plays the best move. He plays bishop to g4. Not allowing this plan. Now ideas like knight to g3 check will be met with simply captures. And after captures, bishop to h3, blocking the check, and after e captures on d5, opening up a discovered attack from the bishop to the bishop, you can simply play c captures on d5. Spassky calculates everything precisely. After bishop captures, pawn captures, rook captures with check, king g2, and white is without any problems here. The rook is under attack. Rook h2 gives nothing. You will simply capture and again attack the rook. So after the rook goes back, you can simply start developing. The rook is coming into the game. The other rook can also come to the e-file. White will simply enjoy his extra piece. So after bishop to g4, Fischer tries knight to d6. And here comes knight 1 to d2 by Spassky. If D captures on e6, F captures on e6, and queen to g6 check, king to e7 is all right for Fischer. And here Spassky thought that it would be very hard to predict what would happen here. It's a crazy position. So Spassky doesn't complicate things. After Fischer's knight to d6, Spassky goes knight 1 to d2. Fischer goes f5, and there's really no good move here for black. Black can simply wait and see what white does. Rook g8 is no better. So here Fischer tried f5. But even if rook g8, a3 is coming, there's nothing to do about this. And now again, if you go to a4, if queen a4, then comes queen to c3. Queen to c3, a very nice idea, attacking the undefended rook on h8, but also threatening knight to c5 to win the queen. But you don't even have to play queen to c3. You can also go immediately knight to c5. This would, again, be winning, but it requires a bit more calculation. But knight to c3, queen to c3, after this a3, queen to c3 would be a very nice human winning move. So after a3, Fischer goes queen to b6, and now comes c5. A very nice idea, because now after Fischer's queen to b5, offering a trade of queens, yes, if you capture, the knight captures, you can no longer capture the knight, but now Spassky uses this fact that the rook on h8 is undefended. The knight is now attacked, the rook is attacked, but there is an even greater threat, because a4 will still win the queen. So there is really nothing Fischer can do here. If you try something like a5 to make room for the queen, okay, you can say that white's bishop is also attacked on g4. Doesn't really matter. Simply a4, after queen moves to a6, then queen captures on h8. F captures on g4, you can capture here, and you can't even castle to maybe claim that you have something here. If you castle, then queen to c3 check, going after c7, king here, and you will even lose the other rook. So after queen to c3, Fischer plays f captures on g4. He decides to give up his queen and hope for perhaps some counterplay against Spassky's king. We have a4 attacking the queen, and now h3. A captures on b5, Spassky snatches the queen, and now we have h captures on g2 with check. King to g2, and now rook to h3, attacking Spassky's queen. Queen to f6, now comes knight to f5. c6 is coming, c6 is played, bishop back to c8, and now d captures on e6. F captures on e6, and now rook f to e1, simply with a double attack against the e6 pawn. Bishop to e7 by Fischer, and here, after Spassky played his 31st move, rook captures on e6. It was in this position that that Fischer decided to resign the game. If you capture, Spassky will simply capture, and there is nothing more to do here. Knight e3 check will be met with king to g1, and now there is no way to continue this attack in any way. Rook e1 is coming, and it is all over. So yeah, Spassky managed to win game 11, and it is the first game. We can say that this is actually the first game he won in this match, because the first game Fischer simply defeated himself, and in the second game Fischer didn't show up for the game. So a very nice victory, a spectacular victory, we might say, as he beat Fischer in the a poison pawn variation of the Najdorf line that he is famous for, that he enjoys playing with both black and white pieces, and he really crushed him in 30 moves. So yeah, also a very funny thing was said by American Grandmaster Madness, who said that Fischer's d5, the pawn sacrifice in this game, got him a lost position. So, you know, usually you sacrifice a pawn for something. Here Fischer sacrificed a pawn for a lost position. But yeah, a 6.5 to 4.5, 6.5 to 4.5. Spassky lowers Fischer's lead to 2 points, and it's you know, it's still a match. Was Spassky resurrected here after this victory? It's hard to say, but it is the first game probably the first game that really shook Fischer, as he did lose in his favorite line, and also it is the first game where Fischer had less time on his clock than Boris Spassky. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Javier Lieberman, Ken Stefan, Lasne Petrik, Thomas Giannakodimos, and Lori Navat for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check two of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you soon with another Bobby Fischer video, but also I will check up on some of your suggestions so we can, include a video or two in between the series. Thank you all, and I'll see you soon.